Hello, students! Today we are going to talk about volcanoes, which is probably one of everybody's favorite topics in 6th grade. So exciting to talk about volcanoes. What? Students will be able to describe the processes by which volcanoes form. So how are they formed? And number 2, explain the predictable pattern of where they're located. Where can we find volcanoes? All right, so volcano forms around a vent or like a hole in the crust where lava and ash are released. They are a mountain type cone object, right? So they usually look like this. It usually has a crater or like a hole on the top. And they can erupt a lot or at different times. And there are different types of volcanoes. So we're going to talk about a couple of different types of volcanoes now. The first type we're going to talk about is a composite or stratovolcano, it's called. So these are built on eruptions that could be a lava eruption and then an ash eruption, and then a lava eruption and then an ash eruption. So those layers build up, those ash and lava layers build up and makes the volcano shape. And so they're usually large, cone-shaped mountains. They can be very explosive, and here's some examples. We've got Mount Fuji, which is our photograph right here in Japan, Mount St. Helens in Washington State in the United States that had a pretty big eruption in 1980 is a composite or stratovolcano. The next type is called a cinder cone volcano. So they are usually built in a short amount of time. They are smaller than composite volcanoes. They are cone-shaped. And this is where blobs of lava erupt and fall into the sides, and that's how they're kind of built quickly. So we've got some examples. Mount Capulan in New Mexico, and that's our photograph here. So my dad lives in New Mexico, and this volcano is pretty near him, so I've been to this volcano. So it's pretty small, but you can like hike around it. But here's some other examples of other cinder cone volcanoes. Like I said, they're a little bit smaller than the composite volcanoes. The third type is called a shield volcano, and I want you to imagine a shield, like Captain America's shield laying on the ground. So they're not huge in terms of height, but they can be huge compared to what big area they take up. So they're built by thick lava flows and they flow slowly. They are the largest type of volcanoes. And some examples are Kilauea in Hawaii, which is the volcano that's been erupting for years. And Mauna Loa, which is also on the island of Hawaii, the Big Island. That's where there's a bunch of telescopes on Mauna Loa because the volcano was built over so long that it is actually really high, even though it's not very steep. Okay, where do volcanoes form? There are 3 places. So number 1, plate boundaries are where most volcanoes form, and the number one we're going to talk about is converging boundaries. So a lot of volcanoes are formed where tectonic plates are converging or pushing against each other. So when we have subduction, either in oceanic and continental crusts, or we have subduction with oceanic and oceanic crusts, we've got some crust that's being pushed down below, and when it's melted, we can get magma that comes to the crust, the surface of the earth, and form volcanoes. So that's one way volcanoes form. The second way volcanoes can form in diverging plate boundaries, where plates are separating and magma is coming to the surface. So again, these can be continental or oceanic diverging boundaries, and we've got some examples. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge in the Atlantic Ocean and the Rift Valley in Africa has volcanoes. I want to talk about the Ring of Fire again quickly. The Ring of Fire is an area that surrounds the Pacific Ocean where we've got lots of plate boundaries and we have lots of volcanoes. All of these red triangles are volcanoes. Not all of them are active, but we've got lots of volcanoes in this area. Okay, the third place a volcano can form is called a hot spot. Now, a hot spot is where there is very hot very hot magma in the mantle. So it's not on a plate boundary. It can be in the middle of a plate, but we've got areas that are really hot in the mantle, and that can rise up and release magma into the crust. So the Hawaiian Islands are a huge example of hot spot volcanoes. So, and these hot spots can exist without a volcano. So if any of you have ever been to Yellowstone National Park, that is a hot spot area. So there is a volcano there in Yellowstone, but there's a lot of activity where we've got geysers and all these hot springs and stuff that's in a hot spot area. Okay, the Hawaiian Islands are hotspot volcanoes. So we've got magma erupting over a hotspot, and that lava can harden and in the ocean, and eventually it will break the surface of the water and become an island. And as the plates move, different islands are formed. So we actually have a brand new Hawaiian island that is going to be formed next to Hawaii in maybe like 100,000 years that will break the surface. So it is being formed right now, but it hasn't broken the surface. So as the plate moves, we've got new islands being formed. So Kauai was formed millions of years ago, probably, and that's when it was sitting right at the hot spot. And then as the plate moves, we get new islands and new volcanoes. So the island of Hawaii, the big island it's called, is currently on the hot spot, and then we've got another island over that hot spot that's going to be formed next. All right, so there are different ways to describe volcanoes. Number one, active, which means that it's erupting right now or has recently erupted. Mount Kilauea in Hawaii is erupting right now. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980 and 2008. There's a picture of Kilauea. A volcano can also be termed as dormant, which means it's quiet now but could erupt again. So Mount Fuji erupted in 1707. It is considered a dormant volcano, that it could still erupt again. Mount Rainier, which is by Mount St. Helens, the last time it erupted was 1894, but it could erupt again. So there's Mount Rainier. And then an extinct volcano is unlikely to erupt again, or it hasn't erupted in 10,000 years, which is a really long time. So our example is the volcano of Kohala in Hawaii, which hasn't erupted for 120,000 years. So we've got active, dormant, and extinct. So some discussion questions, make sure you can answer these. Like, what are the 3 different ways volcanoes can form? How can they form? Different boundaries, and there's a third one. Where are most volcanoes in the world? And again, a review. How are the continents moving? That kind of goes along with where volcanoes can form. So we've got our meme of the day. I hope you enjoyed the notes about volcanoes. And please remember that science rocks.